The trial against CMPD officer Randall West Kerrick is over, but the question remains, will the Attorney General's office choose to retry him? As you may know, the judge in the case declared a mistrial Friday afternoon. Jurors voted 4 times. The last 3 votes were 8-4, leaning toward not guilty. Kerrick is charged with voluntary manslaughter in the shooting death of Jonathan Ferrell in 2013. Ferrell was not armed, and Kerrick says he was fearful of his life. If the Attorney General, Roy Cooper, decides not to retry Kerrick, the charge will be dismissed against the officer. If he goes for another trial, it could be a year before it sees a jury. Our Sharon Smith sat down with a man who says this case will change policing at CMPD and beyond. She has that story new on Primetime.
Stevens retired from CMPD 7 years ago, and since then he's emerged as a national expert on community policing. He's consulted for the Department of Justice on policing reform and traveled to places like Ferguson, Missouri and Baltimore to help in the wake of riots as communities grapple with use of force cases against unarmed black men.
We've seen either acquittals or mistrials happen more often than not, because of the complexity of these cases.
Stevens observed the Kerrick trial and says he supports CMPD's decision to charge swiftly and supports how the department handled protests.
They handled it very, very well. They understand that people have the right to protest.
He also weighs in on perceived contradictions between CMPD policy and training, which the defense pounded on during the trial.
But policy doesn't cover every situation, and he says sometimes policy and reality on the streets can feel confusing and different to the officers. He says the trend here and nationwide is on training, especially when it comes to de-escalation and managing bias.
It's become pretty clear that there needs to be some adjustments made.
He said the Kerrick trial may have been a Charlotte case, but police chiefs across the nation are talking about the decisions made around it. In Charlotte, Sharon Smith, WBTV, on your side.
Since the mistrial, we have seen several protests in uptown Charlotte. This is video from Marshall Park tonight. A small group here, protesters say they are upset the jury could not come to a unanimous decision on whether Kerrick was guilty of voluntary manslaughter when he shot Jonathan Ferrell. We have tried to track down the jurors to hear about their experiences during deliberations. We spoke to a couple of them, but they did not want to speak on camera. They did tell us, though, it was a difficult case. One juror said there were theatrics on both sides of the courtroom and the jury saw through it. Moses Wilson says he was one of the 4 jurors who felt Kerrick was guilty, but the majority of jurors felt Kerrick responded appropriately to Jonathan Ferrell's actions.
He made a lot of mistakes that night. Those that ended up taking part in his killing made a lot of mistakes that night. Those mistakes came together and created something that you can't undo.
The foreman told our media partner at the Charlotte Observer that all the jurors agreed this wasn't about race.